is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China's army launches ballistic missiles into the water around Taiwan in live-firing military exercises. This following US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island.
Our other headlines, the Bank of England makes the biggest interest rate hike in 27 years. With a bleak warning, the country will fall into a long recession this year.
The e-commerce giant Alibaba reports no growth from revenues for the first time in its history, but says signs of recovery are on the horizon.
Europe braces for more belt-tightening as prices continue to climb and rising inflation starts to bite.
And the price we pay for love. Bookings for hotels, restaurants and flower bouquets all surge as China marks its own Valentine's Day.
China has launched ballistic missiles into the sea around Taiwan as part of its live-firing military exercise following US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's controversial visit to the island.
China says its military drills are a deterrence against US-Taiwan interference. The exercise has been strongly condemned by Taiwan's authorities. Our correspondent Sun Ye reports.
The Chinese People's Liberation Army says its military exercises from Thursday would include live fire drills, and the announcement was made 38 hours ahead of schedule.
The timing, I believe, is merely based on international norms. According to international practice, a live fire drill is typically announced 3 days ahead or at least 24 hours in advance. So the PLA has complied with this. This is to allow ships in relevant areas to have time to vacate and for routes to be readjusted. Another key reason is to avoid civilian casualties when live ammunition is fired. In fact, the PLA's early warning reflects its sense of responsibility.
The drills will cover the airspace and waters around Taiwan with precision targets.
This round of drill is different from previous times in that, firstly, it covers greater ground. Second, it's closer to the island. Third, it involves more military elements. And lastly, it should be very effective. Together, the 6 areas form something like a noose. When a knot tightens, it's like containing separatist forces on the island. So this drill should work very well.
The Eastern Theater Command launched air and naval operations late Tuesday amid a controversial visit to Taiwan by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, which China has strongly condemned. And Meng says the U.S. should avoid stoking tensions further.
When there is a major crisis on the island of Taiwan, the U.S. military would deploy some of its key military equipment to the area, such as its carrier battle group, fighter jets, and so on. And the deployment would have the deterrent effect. In fact, it sends a seriously wrong signal to Taiwan's separatist forces, and to some extent, emboldens them.
In the last 2 days has vowed time and again that it will firmly safeguard China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and will definitely thwart the so-called Taiwan independence attempts and the interference of foreign forces. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
China has criticized the G7 group of countries following its call for Beijing not to use the Pelosi visit as a pretext for military activity in the Taiwan Strait. China's foreign minister has cancelled a meeting with Japan on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Cambodia.
The statement of the G7 foreign ministers calls white black. It confuses right and wrong and makes groundless accusations against China's reasonable and lawful measures to safeguard sovereignty and territorial integrity. It is in violation of the basic norms of international relations. If it is allowed to continue, regional and world peace will be severely damaged. China is strongly against the statement.
Now the rest of the day's news, and the Bank of England has raised borrowing rates in the biggest hike in 27 years in an attempt to curb inflation. The bank predicted the UK would fall into recession later this year, around the same time that inflation is expected to rise to over 13%. This is the sixth interest rate rise since December. Our correspondent bleak assessment of things.
Yeah, I think it is pretty bleak, Jamie. This has driven a wrecking ball through the political descriptions of the economy over recent weeks and months. This really laid it bare. First of all, 50 basis points, a 0.5% hike in interest rates. That's the first time they've gone up 0.5% in 27 years. But it's only up to 1.75%, which you've only got to go back as far as 2008 to find interest rates higher than that. So not necessarily that dramatic in terms of instruments to curb inflation. However, we get onto the inflation figures then, and their predictions from 11% have now been swept aside to predictions more akin to over 13%. That's a bit of a bombshell, and also expected to peak higher and last longer. So in other words, inflation perhaps by the end of the year up to 13% and then covering all through 2023 as well. But then the coup de grace was the prediction of recession. Not only recession by the end of this year, but recession that will last through 5 quarters. Here's the chairman of the Bank of England.
Now, this rise in energy prices has exacerbated the fall in real incomes and so led to another significant deterioration in the outlook for activity in the UK and in the rest of Europe. GDP growth in the UK has slowed and the economy is now forecast to enter recession later this year.
Well, there will be, of course, some eyebrows raised about that. Now, the recession isn't perhaps the same sort of recession that we saw during the pandemic, but nonetheless, there will be comparisons. But first of all, comparison to the Federal Reserve, well, their interest rates are now up to between 2.25 and 2.5%. There are some already who are saying the Bank of England's left it too late, that they should have seen this coming earlier and got interest rates up earlier to tackle this inflation. So that's one thing they may have to deal with. Also, this blaming energy prices. Is it all energy prices? Well, it seems to be as far as governors concerned. Nonetheless, this recession will not be as deep as the one during the pandemic, but this time round there'll be no furlough schemes, no protection from the government, no handouts to help people with their businesses. British businesses, small and large, home buyers, all the rest of it are going to have to go it alone and weather this storm with the finances that they have.
Andrew, the two runners to succeed Boris Johnson as UK Prime Minister will debate head-to-head later this evening. What can we now expect from the two candidates following the context of this announcement from England?
Well, I think, Jamie, they're both going to start rewriting their notes pretty sharpish. They've got some questions to answer that they perhaps hadn't been expected at this stage before this announcement from the Bank of England. First of all, it's worth saying that we've had a muted response from the government as it is. Boris Johnson's away on holiday, nothing from him. The Chancellor, Nadeem Zahawi, put out a statement saying that the UK is, prepared to take on what comes and that they've already had some sort of package to help people with their bills. Pretty muted, to be honest. It's going to fall upon Rishi Sunak, the former finance minister, and Liz Truss, the foreign secretary, to battle it out in tonight, the last of the television debates, and questions are going to be far more focused, I fancy, far more informed as the public finally takes on board just what's been told them by the Bank of England today, that we're looking at bleak circumstances, that a lot of it is linked to the war in Ukraine, and thus far the government hasn't really responded in terms of what its short-term plans are to coping with this, let alone its long-term plans. Liz Truss has talked about tax cuts, Rishi Sunak has talked about taking it more easy, going more carefully, but both of them will come under fire and people will expect more clarity and more articulation from the candidates about how exactly they're prepared to take England and steer this boat into this raging storm that's just round the corner.
Andrew, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson.
Nina Scarrow is Chief Executive of the UK's Centre for Business and Economic Research. She said she expects inflation to peak much earlier than the Bank of England estimates.
I would agree with the Bank of England that the UK is facing a recession. I was a little bit surprised to read of the length and depth of recession that the Bank of England is now anticipating. They are expecting 5 quarters of GDP contraction, which would be quite a prolonged recession. At CBR, we are expecting a recession as well. We're actually expecting a recession a little bit earlier than the Bank of England is. So they're saying that the recession will be sort of right at the end of the year, the beginning of 2023, whereas we're anticipating a recession already happening in the second half of 2022. But we are also a little bit more optimistic on how long that recession will last, and we aren't at the moment expecting more than a couple of quarters of negative growth.
This all sounds quite worrying, though, is it?
It's definitely going to be a challenging period for the UK economy. There is now a cycle of monetary tightening, which is overlapping with other factors that are slowing economic growth down. So it is quite a unique and worrying situation when you have growth already projected to slow down. And then on top of that, instead of what you would normally be doing, which is trying to have loose monetary policy and loose fiscal policy, you're actually trying to constrain price growth despite the risks that poses for the GDP outlook.
People have already started cutting back as prices go up, but we're going to see an even bigger squeeze when energy bills rise in the winter. This is going to be a really difficult period for people, isn't it?
There is a lot of challenges for people ahead, especially as the prices that are rising the most, prices of energy, prices of food, which is impacted by higher energy prices as well as it needs to be transported. It's very worrisome because these are types of expenditure where it's very hard for people to cut down. I mean, people can shop around, they can look for bargains, but there is already evidence from the Office for National Statistics showing that people are already consuming and buying less food as a result of price rises, which really underlines just how desperate the situation has become for some households.
So the Bank of England has a 2% inflation target. The governor saying that he wants to go back to that, but realistically, is that completely out of the window for now?
For now, I think we're not going to see inflation anywhere near target for the immediate future. We're actually expecting the inflation target to only be reached in early 2025. Which doesn't mean that inflation will stay at current levels between now and then, but it does mean that this sort of gradual process of inflation ticking down little by little will still take some years. So it is going to be a prolonged period of elevated prices.
Italy is set to approve a $14.5 billion aid package to fight inflation and support for families and firms amid soaring energy costs there. Rome plans to extend existing measures to the fourth quarter of this year, which will include subsidised electricity and gas bills for low-income families. The decree is the last initiative by the outgoing Prime Minister Mario Draghi ahead of next month's election.
80,000 staff at Shell are to receive a one-off bonus after the oil giant reported record second-quarter profits last week of $11 billion. The payout their annual salary has been criticised by anti-poverty campaigners. Shell says the award is a recognition of staff's hard work and not a response to the cost of living crisis.
The German sportswear company Adidas has posted a 28% drop in its operating profit for the second quarter, despite an increase in sales. Results suffered from suspending business in Russia, higher supply chain costs, and COVID lockdowns in China and Vietnam.
Toyota's profits have fallen by 42% due to supply issues and rising costs. The Japanese car maker has been hit by a shortage of semiconductors and the impact of COVID lockdowns in China. Toyota said there was still strong demand for its products and that production was likely to pick up in the second half of the financial year.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, trading sunny California for life in London. Why top bosses at the tech giant Meta are heading to the UK.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Soaring energy prices, surging inflation, strained supply chains. As costs spiral and goods run short, people are feeling the heat. Join us for a special new series, Crunch Time, starting August the 1st, here on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe, and a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba has reported no sales growth for the first time in its history. The firm made $31 billion in revenue in the 3 months to the end of June. During that period, a resurgence of COVID in China led to large cities being locked down. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. So, John, both sales and profits down at Alibaba. What's going on there?
Well, the thing about Alibaba is it's one of those giant e-commerce platforms, a major company. And I always say to people, you know, the big names have finished. They went last week, gave us their earnings. I always forget that Alibaba is coming along, and they came along today, and they actually beat Wall Street expectations. They gave us their fiscal first quarter. So for some reason that nobody really understands, this is the first quarter for Alibaba, where everybody else is giving us their second quarter. The stock was up about 6% on the news early this morning here. It was up 5% in Hong Kong as well. And they beat the street, but as you rightly say, for them, their revenue was flat for the first time since they became public back in 2014. That's when they came here to the New York Stock Exchange in what was the biggest IPO of all time here. So the revenue coming in at just over $30 billion, just under $31 billion, as you were saying. And the reason is COVID controls in China. But the CEO says that in the last month of this quarter, which was June, he saw signs of that issue easing, the supply chain issue improving as well, and generally speaking, signs of recovery. But, you know, Alibaba has some headwinds that it's facing, not least of all tight regulation in Beijing, which we report on from time to time, and also here in the US, the leading regulator, the SEC, adding them to a list last week in which they might be delisted from here, where they were the biggest IPO back in 2014. So to compensate for that, as you know, they've gone for a secondary primary listing in Hong Kong. They've changed the rules in Hong Kong now. So Alibaba can be listed primarily in New York and in Hong Kong. So if they do get ejected from New York, which they're fighting hard not to, then they can move to Hong Kong. And indeed, that's good for Chinese investors. They can invest much more easily if it is a primary listing in Hong Kong, which it will be by the end of the year. So yeah, Alibaba, huge company, huge interest here on Wall Street. But for the first time, revenue, no growth.
And John, we're seeing more Silicon Valley bosses heading to London, including some top staff at Meta.
Yes, including Nick Clegg, who you know very well in London, Deputy Prime Minister under the pact between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats a couple of years ago. He went to California. There was a white flash the other day. Mark Zuckerberg said, "What was that?" And they said that was Nick Clegg whizzing off back to London as soon as he possibly could, because Facebook has a really open policy for people working from home, and there's nobody there these days. They're all working from Caribbean islands, or in Nick Clegg's case, back in London. I mean, to put it it's just a bit difficult to explain, but basically, Facebook or Meta Platforms is at a crossroads, okay? They've had this incredible growth as a social media company, and Mark Zuckerberg was at the forefront of social media, absolute genius. Now he is turning his company into the metaverse, where he will be an absolute genius as well. But I think what's happening is it needs fresh blood, fresh thinking. If you remember when the internet came along, people of my age couldn't understand it, and I can barely understand it now, quite frankly. But for young people today, the notion of the metaverse is very, very confusing. But 100%, Robin, it's coming. 100%. We are in time, probably 20 years, going to be living in a virtual world. You'll be able to have your headphones on, your eyepieces on. You'll be able to go shopping on Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles, for example, and have the stuff delivered to your home wherever you live. Today, this minute, companies are buying up real estate all over the world virtually in case it becomes valuable at a future date. So this is happening right now, and Zuckerberg is at the forefront of all that. So, yep, people leaving Facebook, but don't write them off. Don't write them off just yet.
John, thank you very much. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
Let's take you to Spain now, where inflation has reached 10%. The country is seeing the fastest price increases in nearly 4 decades.
As food and energy costs jump, businesses and households are tightening. Correspondent Rahul Pathak reports.
Meet the Mangual family and their 2 children. They live in an idyllic little town called El Saler, just outside of Valencia. It's a region where many tourists from all over the world come on holiday, and it's a lifestyle that most people would envy. Jose runs his own business in town close to where they live. On the surface, everything is fine, but their lives, like many similar families in Spain, have changed due to circumstances beyond their control. Inflation in June reached a 37-year high at a staggering 10.2% and is now a major concern.
We should be very worried right now. The value of money is dropping, so our cash is now worth 10% less than before. It's a really worrying situation if we can't get inflation under control.
So I'm here at the local petrol pump where the Manguals regularly fill up their cars. Now you can actually see that the prices there equivalent to around $2 per litre. Now that represents a 60% increase on the average petrol price from last year. So basically, if it cost you $50 to fill up your tank in 2021, in 2022 it'll cost more like $80.
Changes to regular habits have had to happen fast in recent months. Electricity usage has been reduced, and the family is now more conscious about what they spend. The cost of food and beverages are now 13% higher than they were last year. That's a bigger increase than in Germany, France or Italy.
You can certainly feel the increase a lot more. Basic products have gone up by 40, 50, 60 cents all of a sudden. You feel the difference from recent times with what we now have to pay.
And more pain is on the way. The European Central Bank has raised interest rates by 0.5 percentage point, so higher payments on many mortgages and loans are set to reduce disposable income even further. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, El Saler.
Europe's biggest economy, Germany, is also feeling the impact of high inflation. Energy prices were over 35% higher in July compared to a year ago, and there's been a sharp rise in the number of people visiting food banks. From Munich, our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
There was a time when retiree Rosemary's basic pension was enough for her to get by. Not anymore.
I don't get much money. That's why I come here. Everything has become more expensive.
Sertap lost her job during COVID-19, and with a big family to feed, she had nowhere else to turn.
In today's times, there's no money, but everything is very expensive, especially when there's a big family. It's very difficult.
Young, old, German, Ukrainian. The demographics of those turning to food banks across Germany are changing. According to organizers, more people registered at this food bank in Munich over the last 6 months than have over the past 2 years.
People who used to be on the other side donating and helping us are now coming and asking for help. And we have lots of families now. It's just not possible for a normal family just to get along.
With basic food prices up 15%, COVID-19 job losses, Ukrainian refugees, and surging energy costs, all of Germany's 962 food banks are seeing longer queues.
Inflationary prices are also having an effect on the donations that food banks across the country are receiving. Supermarkets and individuals simply have less to give away, forcing many people to change their habits to make what they do have last all that bit longer.
Especially past the expiry date, because it's still well preserved.
We buy more jars of cheap food. It might be chicken, it could be fish, because they're more suitable for us.
The German government has waived a surcharge on electricity, radically discounted public transport tickets, and provided one-off payments to each income taxpayer, all to the tune of over $30 billion. But some economists are calling for more immediately effective and long-lasting measures.
It cannot be stressed enough that we're in a dramatic social crisis that is likely to worsen in the coming months. The current relief packages do not sufficiently protect people with low incomes and need to be clever in the sense that financial transfers, giving people money, is a much better measure than making certain things cheaper.
Economists are also warning of permanently high prices for energy and food in the coming years, worrying many social aid providers.
I really need food because we're just trying from Friday to Friday to get enough for everybody.
So too are recipients.
There are noodles, tomato bananas, tomato sauce, chocolate biscuits, small coffee and yogurt for about 14 days or possibly 3 weeks.
While more and more people find themselves rationing what they have, the economic conditions that have brought many to this point are far from over. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich, Germany.
So that's the picture in Germany and Spain, as we reported a little earlier. People in the UK are also having to cut back and cut spending, particularly after another interest rate rise. Let's talk to the financial journalist Jasmine Birtles. Jasmine, welcome back. Well, first of all, what advice would you give to people who are going to be hardest hit by this interest rate rise and the cost of living crisis?
Yes, well, the people that will be particularly hardest hit, I think, by the rate rise are those with mortgages. So I think right now, in fact, I know already there are a lot of people who are concerned about being able to pay their mortgage going forward. They are going to see organisations like Shelter, and I do recommend that anybody who is feeling that they might lose their home goes to see Shelter as quickly as possible. Before that, though, you can speak to your mortgage company, because mortgage companies don't want to and many of them are able to move things around, maybe to extend your mortgage over more years so that the monthly amount is less. So those are the people who are going to be, I think, hardest hit, certainly in the next few months with that rate rise. But also the cost of living, it is affecting everybody, but of course it affects those on the lower levels of income, and particularly the working poor, I would say. There's a bit more government help for those on benefits, but for the working poor, it's getting very, very difficult. And food banks are reporting that they're seeing more people coming who are actually working and needing to get food from them.
It's easy, isn't it, to send round that very blunt message, spend less. What do you think the knock-on effect will be for small businesses and those independent service providers if people have less disposable income to spend?
Yes, it's very difficult when people like me spend our time saying to consumers, stop spending. But then, of course, as you say, there is a big concern about small businesses. And I think quite a lot of those, particularly those that have physical premises on the high street or off the high street even, they have extraordinary expenses. They've got their, lighting and heating going up, taxes are going up, they've got potentially business taxes going up next year if that's not removed. And if people are spending less, they're not going out so much, particularly not going out for a nice coffee here and there. I think we will see quite a number of these small businesses going out of business. And frankly, some larger businesses as well. It will be, I was going to say interesting, sad, frankly, sadly interesting to see which businesses survive and which don't over the next year or so.
We've listened to two different forecasts in this programme on the length of the UK recession. What is your expectation?
I think we're coming into a difficult decade, frankly. You know, a lot of people have connected these current times with the 1970s. But of course, in the 1970s, we didn't have the issue of extraordinary money printing, quantitative easing that we have had here. And I personally put down the current particularly difficult situation to lockdowns and the consequent money printing, which is different from the quantitative easing we had earlier, where the money basically went to the banks and kind of disappeared there. Over the last 2.5 years, we've had quantitative easing in Britain, across Europe, very much in America, where much of the money has gone into the system and has brought down the value of the pound, the euro, the dollar. And this, I consider, is the fundamental reason for the inflation that we all have. And the recession comes from some of that as well. The war with Russia is, frankly, just the cherry on the top, in my view.
Jasmine Birtles in London, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
And you can see all the stories from our Economic Impact series on a special page of our website at europe.cgtn.com.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we're live in Russia, where a court has sentenced the US basketball star Brittany Griner to 9 years in prison on drugs offences.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top story. China's army launches ballistic missiles into the water around Taiwan in live-firing military exercises. This following US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island.
Kishore Mahbubani is a distinguished fellow at the Asia Research Institute within the National University of Singapore. He also served as Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations and as president of the United Nations Security Council. I asked him what was achieved by Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan.
Sadly, the visit has shown that the United States is deeply divided as a country, because this visit was certainly not endorsed by President Joe Biden. He wasn't happy about it. But Speaker Nancy Pelosi, in an effort to improve her personal poll ratings, decided to risk the U.S.-China relationship by Taiwan.
Is this a diplomatic flash in the pan, if I can call it that, or do you think it has longer-term implications?
It has longer-term implications because the most important geopolitical relationship is the one within the world's number one power, which today is the United States of America, and the world's number one emerging power, which is China. And as I document in my book, Has China Won? This geopolitical contest will last for at least another 10 years or more for deep structural reasons. And therefore, when it is mishandled, as this Pelosi visit was mishandled to Taiwan, then what it does is that, of course, it increases the suspicion between the two countries, makes communication more difficult, and makes the situation more dangerous. And therefore, it's very important for both sides to exercise a lot of restraint to ensure that visits like this don't trigger accidents that could lead to very dangerous confrontations.
As a diplomat, then, let me ask you, where is the route, where is the road to resetting this relationship, if that is possible?
Well, I think it is definitely possible to reset the relationship. And fortunately, the greatest strategic thinker in the United States is Henry Kissinger. And he has given a very simple piece of advice. He said, the United States must stop these endless provocations of China. That's a word that he used. So, in fact, I cite him in my book, Has China Won Too, as saying that the fundamental problem that the United States has in its relationship with China is that it hasn't worked out a comprehensive long-term strategy to manage this return of China. So one way, frankly, of finding the route back to a better relationship is for the United States to step back, look at this overall comprehensive long-term strategic picture, and then decide how it's going to live with the China that is going to become, in many ways, as strong as, if not stronger than, the United States of America. So the first step to take in any difficult exercise is to engage in deep reflection.
What of the possible face-to-face summit between the President of China and the President of the United States? Does it now go ahead? And if so, what are the prospects for those talks?
It is very unlikely, given the difficult relationship between United States and China, for President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping to have a physical face-to-face bilateral meeting in a bilateral visit. However, they can definitely meet in a multilateral setting. And fortunately, there are two important leaders meetings coming up. There's an APEC leaders meeting coming up in Thailand, and there's a G20 leaders meeting coming up in Bali, Indonesia. At one of these two places, I hope that President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping will find an opportunity to talk to each other. And because they are, fortunately, these two men know each other very well. They have had many meetings before they both assumed their respective presidencies. And if a way can be found for them to have a bilateral meeting within a multilateral setting, then I hope that there will be, in one way or another, maybe even a slight improvement in U.S.-China relations.
A Russian court has found US basketball star Brittany Griner guilty of drug offences and given her a 9-year prison sentence. Her lawyers say they will appeal. However, there is speculation she could be freed as part of a prisoner exchange between Moscow and Washington. The United States has offered to free a convicted arms dealer in exchange for Griner and a former US Marine, Paul Whelan. US media are reporting that Russia is requesting a former colonel from its spy agency, who's also a convicted murderer, be included in the swap. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, who's in Moscow, and a reminder that journalists in Russia are working under media laws which restrict what they can report. So, Stuart, what happened in court?
Well, it started with the prosecution. We've not heard much from them, but they were making clear what they wanted in terms of an outcome when it came to sentencing. They asked for 9.5 years, and that's very close to what the eventual outcome was. They say, and justifying why 9.5 years, the prosecution said that her guilt was already established because she did earlier in the hearing plead guilty, but they said that they believe United States to Russia, something she vehemently has denied throughout, saying that it was an honest mistake. Then it was from the turn of the defence to put their closing arguments. They said that they felt that the judge should be imposing the lesser sentence possible, the least strict sentence possible, because they say for a number of reasons there were problems with the way that her case was dealt with. There were issues with the methodology used by airport officials who examined those vape capsules with around 0.7 grams of cannabis oil, and they say that there were issues with translation of documents for Brittany Griner. In addition, they say it was a small amount with no intent, and that the maximum sentence of 10 years was completely unjustified.
So, Stuart, what are Brittany Griner's options now, and what's the mechanism for a potential prisoner swap to take place?
Well, her lawyers have said that she will appeal, and that process, the lawyers have around 10 days to make that appeal. While that happens, she's not going anywhere. She will remain in the same place she's been in custody so far, here in Khimki, in the Moscow region, just outside Moscow. While that case is ongoing, there's also no chance of a prisoner swap. Having said that, now that she has been found guilty in court and has received her sentence, that does mean there's the potential for discussions if a second trial is not approved. In other words, discussions can continue, but if this appeal does go to the next court, then things would have to stop for that time. In terms of whether this is geopolitical, her lawyers afterwards had an interesting comment. They said for this amount of substance brought across, they would have expected normally an average sentence of around 5 years in prison, and a third of people who are found with such a substance would be let off on parole. So her case, they said, is very anomalous, and that means that the US is still treating this as a wrongful detention. The charge d'affaires afterwards from the US Embassy said that for nothing more than an unintentional oversight, this, the US believes, is an miscarriage of justice, and so the US says it will continue to support her and speak with her as frequently as they can.
Stuart, thanks very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Ukraine has hit back at what it calls unfair claims that civilians have been put at unnecessary risk in the ongoing war with Russia. Amnesty International says Kyiv has placed troops and weapons in areas of fighting. Our Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther is in the Ukrainian city of Lviv. Philip, what exactly are these claims and what's the response been?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Ukrainian officials are incensed by this report. The Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba calls it unfair and also says that it creates a false balance between a criminal and a victim, talking there, of course, about the invading army from Russia and the Ukrainian army that is trying to defend its territory right now. We've also heard from the closest presidential advisor to Volodymyr Zelensky. This is Mr. Podolyak. He says that this report by Amnesty International is, in his view, part of a disinformation and propaganda campaign. Indeed, it's worth noting that this report has been getting a lot of column inches and a lot of airtime on Russian and pro-Kremlin TV and media. Now, the report, though, is very, very serious, and here is what it says, that the Ukrainian armed forces have essentially used as their bases or launched attacks from the likes of schools, residential buildings, and hospitals. Amnesty International says that there were 19 villages and towns where this was happening, and indeed quite a few of my colleagues here at the Associated Press have seen scenes that are very similar, that mirror these findings by Amnesty International.
And Philip, Ukraine is warning of a new Russian offensive in the south of the country as the death toll keeps rising.
Yeah, this is still a very long front line here between Ukrainian forces and Russian forces, meaning that there are attacks across the board in the south of the country and, of course, in the eastern Donbass region, particularly in the Donetsk region that is not yet 100% under Russian control. That is, of course, the case in the Luhansk region right now. And it's worth looking today at specifically at the town of Toretsk, where, according to the local Ukrainian governor of that region, he says that artillery there hit a bus stop, apartment buildings and a church, leading to the deaths of 8 people. There have been other attacks over the last 24 hours from the Russian side on cities like Mykolaiv in the south. That is a city that has been hit relentlessly by Russian forces, not just recently, and also the city of Nikopol. This is a city Ukrainian control, but that sits just across the Dnipro River from Russian-controlled territory in the south. And also remember that it is in the south where the Ukrainian forces have said very clearly over the last few weeks that they are planning a counter-offensive in the Kherson region more than anywhere else to take back territory that is currently under Russian control. And indeed, Ukrainian forces have already had some success there.
Philip, thank you very much. That's Philip Crowther from the Associated Press in Lviv.
The United States Senate has approved the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO, the 2 Nordic countries asked to join the military alliance following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Full membership requires approval from all 30 NATO members. 7 are yet to ratify this move. Germany's national carrier Lufthansa says it expects a boom in travel to continue as it reported its first quarterly profit since the start of the pandemic. The company's CEO says despite ongoing problems at European airports and uncertainty over inflation, the airline is seeing passengers return after several years of travel restrictions. From Berlin, our correspondent Trent Murray.
Well, Lufthansa is back in the black. The German flag carrier reporting earnings before interest and tax of over $400 million for the 3 months through June. It is a stark contrast to the same period last year when they suffered a loss of $842 million. Now, the Lufthansa Group, which also includes Eurowings, Brussels, Austrian and Swiss Airlines, says all signs point to strong ticket sales for the remainder of the year, and they are now forecasting a full-year adjusted profit of over $500 million. The German flag carrier says short-haul flights within Europe, strong sales in the cargo division and a return of business travel are all helping the airline ride the headwinds back to profitability. Load factors in premium classes are now similar to 2019 levels, while bookings overall through August to December are now on average of 83% of what they were before the pandemic grounded most of the airline's fleet. Announcing the results, CEO Carsten Spohr said, quote, "Hardly anyone would have thought this development was possible at the start of the year when the Omicron variant was spreading rapidly," going on to say it's a clear sign that 2 years of the pandemic, people want to travel again. It's not all clear skies, though. The rapid rebound continues to put huge strain on European airports, with Lufthansa already cancelling over 2,000 flights this summer because of staffing shortages, particularly at its travel hubs in Frankfurt and Munich. Meanwhile, tense negotiations continue between management and several unions after Lufthansa ground staff walked off the job last Wednesday in a pay dispute. They're warning it could be the first of more strikes to come unless their demands for a 9.5% pay rise are met. It comes as conversations with pilots also continue after they voted Sunday to launch industrial action, their union calling for a 5.5% pay rise. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Red roses no longer do. Couples in China mark Valentine's Day as shops vie for romantic revenue.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Wildfires raging through Europe this summer have burnt through the second largest area on record. That's despite the region being only halfway through the typical fire season. Over 6,000 square kilometres of land has been affected. That's the second highest total since the year 2006. About a dozen European countries, including France, Greece, Portugal and Spain, have all suffered this year.
A volcano has erupted near Iceland's capital following days of earthquakes. Planes have been diverted from flying overhead, while tourists and residents have been told to avoid the area due to poisonous gases. The volcano erupted last year for the first time in 6,000 years.
Coral has recovered from storms and bleaching events to record levels across much of Australia's Great Barrier Reef. That's according to a long-term monitoring program. In about two-thirds of the reef, coral covers exceeds 30%, which is the level considered healthy. But scientists warn the UNESCO World Heritage Site remains vulnerable to man-made and natural threats.
Japan is enduring one of its worst heat waves on record. In July, a record 320 people were taken to hospital for heat-related conditions. Japanese are snapping up cooling products from ice sprays to wearable fans. Our correspondent Terence Tashima reports from Tokyo.
Since June 25th, an unprecedented heat wave has blanketed Japan. Temperatures of 35 degrees Celsius and above were recorded at 200 observation points across the country on August the 3rd. With the rising temperatures, sales of cooling products are also said to be climbing. Home improvement retailer Kynes Corporation, which sells anything from do-it-yourself goods to toothbrushes in their 228 stores across the country, says sales are brisk.
The rainy season ended early, so the sales started to climb from around June. Ice pillows are selling more than 300% compared to normal years, and ice towels selling around 200%.
It's been raining today, humidity is high and the heat is stifling. Devices like these are very useful. This is a fun type, but there's also an ice ring type to keep your neck cool. New products are coming out rapidly, but the store owners say they're being sold as fast as they come in. The most popular products are the ice towels. The temperature of the towel drops significantly to keep your neck cool. Ice sprays applied to clothing can keep what you're wearing cool for a while.
My son plays sports outdoors and I worry about him, so I started looking for this kind of products.
For workers engaged in outdoor activity, vests with built-in fans are available to maintain their body temperature and prevent heat strokes. And here's one that's wacky, an umbrella with a built-in fan connected to a bottle of water to it, and you get a cooling mist around you. With the number of COVID cases hovering around 200,000 a day, authorities have issued guidelines for health workers to prevent infection and heat stroke and to stay hydrated. Japan's meteorological agency warns that the heat wave will continue for at least another 2 weeks and have advised the public to take precautions. Terence Tershima, CGTN, Tokyo.
Bookings for hotels and restaurants have surged across China as the country marks its own Valentine's Day, the Qixi Festival.
Flower sales are up too, as the retail and catering industries cash in on pent-up demand after the pandemic. Our correspondent Olivia He reports.
Roses, candlelight dinners and presents. These are all common elements that make Valentine's Day around the world. And in China, the Qixi Festival is not only a day for couples to express their love, but also presents new opportunities for businesses to market products and services. Some catering companies have launched romantic packages for the Chinese Valentine's Day, and theaters have also released romantic films, driving the expanding romance economy.
After visiting many flower shops in and around Beijing, I found that besides best-selling roses that represent love, creative flower bouquets made from lotus seeds and other food products are also popular this year.
Bouquets made from lotus and peony are in high demand during this year's Qixi Festival. Most people seem to prefer creative bouquets rather than red roses. Usually, we get about 2 to 3 orders every day, but on Qixi Festival, they rise to 40 to 50 orders. The average price of an order is about 400 yuan.
As popular as flowers are, jewelry and beauty products are a hit among consumers too. This year's Qixi Festival, a number of jewelry and cosmetics shops have launched their very own promotions. In order to attract consumers, major jewelry stores have launched promotions such as buy one get one free or buying products to get some flowers or gifts for free.
What's more, several restaurants are launching meals for couples during Chinese Valentine's Day, with some even offering discounts on special meals. Let's see what they got.
We have specially launched 3 couple packages and also did a restaurant makeover with flowers and balloons to enhance the festive atmosphere. Besides, we are also offering full discounts. Every year on Chinese Valentine's Day, the crowds are huge. From 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., guests start lining up and the restaurant is full until 8 to 9 p.m.
According to latest reservation data on the Meituan search engine, the number of bookings for restaurants on Qixi Day has nearly doubled compared to last year. More people have begun to pay attention to the traditional festival in China.
As an important festival in traditional Chinese culture, Qixi Festival has gradually evolved into what's now seen as the romance economy and a new force for consumption growth. Olivia He, CGTN, Beijing.
The headlines again. China's army launches ballistic missiles into the water around Taiwan in live firing military exercises. This following US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island.
Our other headlines, the Bank of England makes the biggest interest rates hike in 27 years with a bleak warning. The country will fall into a long recession this winter.
And the e-commerce giant Alibaba reports no growth from revenues for the first time in its history, but says signs of recovery are on the horizon.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.